It's time for Speaking of Speaking. Quick tips and tools to take you from stage fright to spotlight. This podcast gives you an inside look from the world of public speaking and speaking secrets you need to be bold from the stage, no matter what business you're in. The host of Speaking, Carl Richards.
Thank you, Matt. And yes, welcome to another edition of the Speaking of Speaking podcast. It's part 3 of the series we've been doing, Speaking of your podcast. And today we're talking about building your audience. And specifically, we're going to talk about some marketing techniques that you can be doing to organically build your podcast audience without having to spend money on advertising or anything like that. One of the reasons people don't start podcasts is because they are concerned about how or what the techniques are to basically growing their audience. They're concerned that they won't have an audience. They're going to put all this effort into launching a podcast, and then they won't have an audience that'll be listening to them. And then, therefore, will it really be elevating their credibility? So that's what we want to talk about today is how can you do that organically to ensure that you build your audience right from the beginning. And there's some very simple marketing techniques that I'm going to share with you today that'll help with that. It's something that we do a deeper dive in the 60 Days to Launch program. And even in the Podcast Launch Made Simple workshop week, we talk about it in depth as well. Marketing your podcast really starts with 3 S's. The first S is you need a strategy. Not only do you need a podcast launch strategy, but you need a marketing strategy. And that starts way before you even launch your podcast, because you should be talking it up right now. Even if you haven't launched your podcast yet, but you know you're going to be launching in, say, the next 30, 60, or 90 days, you should be letting people know now. All right. So the first S is strategy. The second S is schedule. You need a schedule. You need to be able to start letting people know how often they'll be able to find your podcast episode. Is it going to be weekly? Is it going to be every other week? Is it going to be daily? I know people that have launched podcasts, and for their first week or 2 or 3 weeks of launching, or even the first year, have done episodes every day. But you need to know what that schedule is. So you need to know, firstly, how it's going to impact your marketing, but then also you need to know how it's going to impact whatever your workload is. But you need to have that schedule. The other thing you need is social media. Now, it sounds pretty obvious that you would need some type of social media strategy to make this happen, but you would be surprised how many people have podcasts but have very little social media presence. And social media, whether we like it or not, is a very useful tool for marketing whatever it is we do, whether it be our podcasts or other things. But definitely for podcasts, there is a lot of social media strategy that you can tap into. And as a matter of fact, it's one of the things that my company does is we use social media to link back and link to other sites and directly to our podcast as well. So marketing your podcast, the 3 S's: strategy, schedule, and social media. So what do you need to market your podcast? What are some simple things that you can be doing right now? Well, I already mentioned one of them, and that's if you know you're launching, say, in the next 30 to 90 days, you should start talking it up now. You should start letting people know that when you're having conversations with them, when you're in your networking meetings, when you're doing posts on social media, you should be saying, hey, my podcast is coming. It's launching this fall, or it's launching in January, or whatever the time frame is. You don't need a specific date, but you need to know a time frame so when you are talking it up, you can let people know. So that's number one, is you need to be talking it up now. You need to also do certain things such as, for example, post it to your website. There are many different ways you can post it to your website. You can put a countdown clock up if you're brave and you know exactly what date you're launching. You can also just start creating a page and say, coming soon, my podcast, whatever your podcast is. You should be creating a Facebook page or communicating with your audience on your existing Facebook page to let them know that your podcast is coming as well. You should also change it up and put it in your bio. You know, your existing bio that you hand out for speaking engagements or networking opportunities, it should be in there. Once you start talking it up, you'll be surprised how many people will think, oh, wow, you have a podcast coming? And by the way, once you launch, it can be, oh, wow, you have a podcast? Very cool. So that can be on your Speaker One sheet as well, by the way, for people who use the Speaker One sheet. You can even add it to your email signature. I know people that have done that and have gotten several hits to their podcast because of that. Be creative, too, when you're looking at your marketing strategy. Embrace something that you might not have embraced before. So for me, when I started doing a deeper dive into podcast marketing, I realized that there's an untapped weapon by a lot of business professionals because we think it's not for us. And I'm speaking specifically of TikTok. Now, TikTok fits into the social media strategy, but it's amazing how much content is out there that is not just the, teenage boys and girls doing funky dances. It's actually, there's a lot of credibility and a lot of amazing content on TikTok, just like there's on other social media channels as well. But do not dismiss the power of that platform. It is phenomenal. If you have a blog, you should be letting people know in your blog that your podcast is coming. And then as a marketing strategy, you should be promoting your podcast either as part of your blog or your podcast becomes part of your blog. And make sure that once you are launched, you are promoting every single episode so people know that you have a podcast. So those are some very simple ways without spending a dime using your existing strategies. Are there others? Absolutely. Emailing your list and letting them know you have a podcast is another way too. All the other social media channels, including LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I already mentioned Facebook pages, but even Facebook stories. All of those things are great ways to let people know. And of course, in your networking meetings, talk it up. Talk it up. Talk it up is probably the biggest one that is probably the most powerful. The more you let people know you're doing something, the more likely they are to jump on board and give it a listen. And there are some other strategies too for your launch. We're not going to talk about that, but if you are interested in finding out more or you're ready to launch your podcast, the next installment of the Podcast Launch Made Simple Workshop Week, I'll post the details in the show notes. You'll be able to click on the link and check it out. But it is a great way to get things started and move things forward for you. That workshop week has helped. So far, it's helped about 40 or 50 people get launched, and you can be the next person launching your podcast because of that. And of course, don't forget the 60 Days to Launch program, which is a full 2-month program with other add-ons that we've created to help you be successful from basically going from zero to having a podcast and beyond in 60 days and then beyond the 60-day period. Okay, so all of that will be in the show notes after today. And if you have a question after today, don't hesitate to drop me a note anytime. It's askcarl@carlspeaks.ca. I hope it's been helpful. Until next time, it's Carl Richards. Get out there and own the podcast platform.
Thanks for listening to the Speaking of Speaking podcast. Fired up about something you heard today? Want to learn more? Be sure to visit carlspeaks.ca. And don't forget to follow Carl on Twitter @CarlRichards72 or join the Facebook group Speaking of Speaking.